Serious, prostitutes, escorts, strippers, other kinds of sex workers. What was your first day on the job like? Did escort for about a year. The first day was relieving. I was terrified at first because I was given the rundown for what redheads to look out for. There was a lot. But I went on. Most of my clients ended up being older men who just wanted a pretty girl to be seen with and to listen to them. My first day felt more like a therapist than an escort. A bit intimidating, but not really much different. If anything, I had a little better of an idea of what I was doing compared to working at Starbucks. I worked independently as an escort, so there wasn't really anyone to give me advice on what to expect. I read some websites here and there with general advice and set up a profile. The first few messages were people trying to scam me or looking for free nudes, and eventually somebody came through who seemed genuine. We discussed everything and then set a meet-up at his place. Followed up with a phone call as I was setting off to confirm. Seemed a bit shifty over the phone, which made me nervous, and I didn't fully understand the directions to his place. I walked in circles around several apartment blocks being lost and called him nearly in tears because I couldn't figure out where to go. He ended up standing outside his block, so I saw him and he actually looked normal, lol. Slightly balding, wearing a t-shirt and jeans with a round face and a kind expression. I can still picture him waving at me and me running towards him like a lost child who just found their parent. Got inside his apartment, ushered him into the shower with me, and then the actual sex part was over fairly quickly. He booked a whole hour and we probably spent 45 minutes just talking about his life, video games, and movies we like. The job has its ups and downs, but after that, I stopped being so nervous and learned it wasn't as difficult as I thought. Most of my job was just being a good listener and boosting egos, make people feel good about themselves. Was a stripper in my late teens. The first day I was nervous as fuck. Some drunk dude walks up to the stage waving a dollar bill and said, "Slap your ass, I'll give you $1." Oddly enough, that made me somehow more comfortable with the whole thing. I actually enjoyed it and wasn't half bad. I made more money, legally, from 17 to 20 than any other job I had until like 2 years ago. I'm 37 now. Escort in a brothel. Edit. Escort is a commonly used synonym for all the other words for full-service sex worker where I'm from, making a note as there has been some confusion. Honestly, my first day was a mixed bag. The other girl I worked with was hilarious and properly took me under her wing, and fed me a glass of wine before my first jaunt to settle my nerves. I haven't drunk on the job since that day, but that one drink really helped. I got tipped by one client, assaulted by another. When I was assaulted though, the other worker, the receptionist, and my boss all had my back and gave him a proper telling off about him. This was a one-off, it hasn't happened since. I've never felt safer in any other job, and I have more control. I walked home that day with more money than I'd earn in a week in my last job. I've never looked back. Stripped briefly to pay for a semester's worth of tuition and books. On my first day, a lady shouted, "Whip out your pecker." And I couldn't help but laugh from both nerves and the fact she said pecker. After that, the rest seemed pretty easy. I'm long retired now, but I was 21 at the time and at a loose end, new city and no job, so decided to work at a gentleman's club, as a prostitute. I'd done my research and been in for an interview, so I was feeling confident and relaxed. No one else showed up on time, so I was the only girl there on the day shift and sat chatting to the receptionists. My first client was a really good-looking English/Sri Lankan guy who was really sweet and equally nervous. We both couldn't believe it was the other's first time until we were both fumbling and laughing trying to put a condom on correctly. I can't remember who else I saw that day, but I do remember getting paid more than I had earned in a week working 2 jobs. I ended up working for around 7 years and really enjoyed it. I started as a waitress in a strip club. 3 months later I tried dancing. My first time in the VIP, where I had been seeing the workflow for 3 months, so I knew what to say and where to go. But my hands were shaking. The guy even asked me if I was okay. After that first hour, it was fine, but my body literally was shaking in the beginning. I didn't feel scared, though. It was a natural reaction. Former exotic dancer of 3 years. The first night was intimidating in part because the other dancers are generally hostile toward new girls. That may have just been the case at that club, I'm not sure, but also because the job itself is so heavily stigmatized that you find yourself afraid that somebody you know will see you. That faded after a few weeks though, and it was actually a really fun job. You should always be careful not to fall into the lifestyle though. Keep work and personal lives separate. 6.9k, dare I say, nice double edit. 6.9 was a 69 reference, hence the nice. Didn't mean to confuse anybody, sorry. I was a cam girl for a little bit. The first time was with my roommate. She had been doing it and I knew she was a cam girl. She was making more in one night than I was from babysitting like 4 times a week. It was really awkward at first, but my roommate was a pro and played into it. First time lesbian sort of thing. Those tokens were flying in. Despite it being awkward, it was fun and we made a lot. So I started my own account, became a cam girl. Terrifying. I was 21 years old and had never even stepped foot inside a strip club. I had bought a matching bra and underwear set from Marshall's along with regular heels, big mistake. I was told to watch the dancer before me on stage, who of course was gorgeous and clearly knew what she was doing. I went up there and immediately busted my ass because of the normal sized heels. The rest of the time was just spent holding onto the pole for dear life and hoping I wouldn't get fired for being the worst dancer they'd ever witnessed. I wasn't fired and eventually got the hang of everything, but I still cringe at how awful those first initial days were. Former male stripper here. It was awesome. It was comedic, sexy, and fun. Just an absolute party. The crowd had a blast. We quintuple lap danced the bachelorhood. It didn't pay much, but I wasn't really in it for the money. I would totally start another show if I can make it happen. I only had 2 brief uncomfortable moments that night. First, an old woman just grabbed my goodies. Second, another old woman shoved $1 so far between my cheeks that I didn't see it until after the show. Terrifying. My rent was due soon and I felt there was no other option, so I went straight to Craigslist offering sex. I was well aware of the possibility that I could be putting myself in serious danger, but, at the time, getting my rent in on time was my only worry. I was advertising in a murder capital city. I hated it. I hated every man I encountered in sex work afterward, and I try not to think about that time in my life. I assumed that because I was already very promiscuous and used to having sex with strangers that it wouldn't be so bad, but it's so much worse when you can't be picky. There's a reason that kind of men pays for sex. They tend to be creepy and unattractive to the point that buying sex is the only way they can get a woman to look at them. I'm sure I'll get downvoted Reddit hates when I talk shit about prostitution because everyone has this wonderful, idealized picture of it in their heads, while I spent years drinking heavily just to get the images out of my own head. I ended up going to trade school and I now have a well-paying, exciting career in factory labor, but I wouldn't trade it for any kind of sex work. I actually enjoy my job. And I get to gladly tell any man that tries hitting on me there to go fuck yourself with an airline. I knew what it would be like going into it. I'd been working for the agency for a few months as a driver. Taking the girls to their appointments, making sure they didn't get robbed or killed. My boss mentioned that he had had some interest from females wanting a male escort. I'd seen Deuce Bigalow. I figured, why the hell not? I was 18, and I cleaned up pretty nicely. My first client was a woman in her late 30s. Not a supermodel, but not unattractive at all. She was in town for some auto parts convention and wanted someone to show her around. We wound up sleeping together after. I got my money and left the next morning. I did that until I moved out of state 3 years later. Nerve-wracking. It was professional, but I was 21, it was just me and him, and he had to drive me to another location. But he was super nice and realized real quick I was nervous, so he talked to me the whole way there. He even made jokes while we were switching positions. Fun guy. I would have kept going in that line of work, but a friend caught chlamydia, so I was out. I'm 21 and was an oil wrestler for a short time just last year, and I was terrified. I had no practice or was shown anything. I made $10 in tips that night, but as it went on for the next 3 weeks, I began making more. The girls were really cliquey and at times total bitches. The men we entertained were disgusting low hygiene cowboys and rude as fuck. Not my scene, but nothing but respect for the women who were able to have fun in that environment. It was liberating. I was nervous at first, but all smiles afterward. Being a guy, I probably had different experiences. I was awkward looking even through my early 20s. I decided to become a rent boy when I realized there was a certain subsect of older gay gentlemen who appreciated the way I had aged and carried myself. I did it for about a year or so until I met my husband. All in all, I made some money and walked away feeling better about myself. I don't really know if this counts, but I'll share anyway. I am not a sex worker, although I was paid in the, somewhat, recent past to work a glory hole. The glory hole was in the staff bathroom of a club not far from my student accommodation. I was told that certain guests were going to be given the option to use the staff bathroom for the glory hole, but not to expect that many people. I was paid £200 each night and I worked 2 weekends in a row. My first night, and pretty much every night, was very scary. My expectation was that a dick would come through the hole. I blow it until he comes and the job is done. I didn't expect that I was going to have abuse shouted at me, having people look over and under the cubicle and threatened. Every night I complained to the manager and he promised to do something about it, but nothing ever really changed. As I said, I only worked for 2 weekends because it was really scary. Hope this was somewhat relevant. Started at 19. A boyfriend of 3 years dumped me, so I moved to another city and become a hooker. Very first night on the job, it was a quiet night. I didn't get any jobs. My boss, an older man, took me upstairs to one of the rooms, pushed me down onto the bed and stuck his tongue down my throat. When I told him to stop and that I don't think we should be doing it, he said that I need to get comfortable working eventually. I think he felt bad cause he gave me $100 and sent me back downstairs. The next day I had 2 jobs. The first one, my actual first full-service job ever, the dude was so high on coke he came before I even touched him. The second job was the exact same, except we got far enough to put the condom at that time. I was like, damn, I hope it's all gonna be that easy. It definitely is not always that easy. But I love it. I was 18 and naive. My first client chose me because I was new, fresh meat. He was a regular at the club. I was terrified but went along with it. He made me call him daddy, and every time he pushed into me I winced from the pain. He secretly took the condom off. The manager or girl who gave me an introduction tour never warned me of clients trying to take off condoms. I couldn't tell management about him since he was a regular at the club. They also never told me there was an emergency button to leave the room if I needed to. I only learned 3 years later when a client beat me. That's when I decided it was my last day. I was kicked out / left on my own. It's complicated. At 19. I saw the writing on the wall and needed money fast, so I started as a stripper at 18. The Great Recession happened a few years later, and so I moved to escort at 22. The first job as a dancer was with 2 other girls to a private party. I had something of a debut, and while I had no idea what I was doing, I had my heels on and I knew how to shake my butt. I had literally $200 in singles just rained on top of me. 30 minutes of work. Who knew how much the other girls made? But I was hooked. The economy took a huge downturn a few years later, and so many of my regular hot times were not as prolific. I only worked on call, private parties / bachelor parties / rush week, etc., as I wanted to stay out of a fixed location but this would up hurting me in the long run. I turned to escort, through an agency who actually was pretty kind, and I'm still amazed I never had to audition for any of my agencies. He set me up with a John who was an utter gentleman. Kind and considerate. I explained his side of things in a way that made sense and helped me find peace and less of a sense of guilt about what I was doing. I saw him a couple of times, but I think after that my novelty wore off, which is fine. Every once in a while my thoughts float to him and his beautiful golden retrievers. I hope he's living a good life somewhere. I'm pretty sure my life would have gone a different way without those 2 experiences. And don't get me wrong, I've had plenty of just raunchy, awful, ungodly, unforgivable things done and said to me in my career for the sake of rent. But holding on to the few bright moments I had helped me make it through to financial and familial freedom as well as retirement from the industry. I can. My first time doing it, something happened and my stream was shown in a lot of different places and I had almost 1,000 people show up. I was terrified going into it, but once the money started to get rolling it felt a lot more natural. Well, I'd like to start by saying, I used to be a male escort at age 15. I looked way older than I was. My first day was a little awkward, but that's because, at the time, I was mute. I put up a flyer on Craigslist saying I was a young male mute escort and that I'd message my rates. At first, I was scared, but not because it was my first time, I'm just a very shy introvert. When I got my first message, it was from a much older woman. She looked to be around 50. I told her my rates and we talked about what was going to happen. She was sweet and caring, but she was one of those people you could just tell was lonely. Later that night, I got dressed, we met up at a hotel she had paid for, and we had sex. After that though, for the rest of the time, we just cuddled and she talked to me about her day, what's going on in her life, etc., and I just listened. So all in all, my first day wasn't really bad, I just ended up being shyer than I had wanted to be. The first time ever escorting was not like I planned on I'm gonna do this. I was propositioned at a club, where I was dancing. I couldn't make it in a strip club, was not making more than $100 to $300 a shift, and every girl would brag about making $1-2K. I'm like, WTF is wrong, W me, but I needed the deposit for my house and took him up on it. I look back and think, wow, I can't believe he even paid me that much, cause I was definitely grossed out and unenthusiastic. I was a dancer in my college years. I was so nervous, not because of the dancing, but because I was afraid I didn't look as good as the other girls / they wouldn't like me. It turns out they were so sweet and so diverse. One of my coworkers had 5 young kids. One of them was a PhD candidate at one of the local universities. One of them loved to bake in her spare time. Sharing small details like that about our lives made us grow together. Most of the regulars that came in were your average guys, nothing weird or creepy. Eventually, when you got to know them enough, they would talk about things that stressed them out, like their dad or their job, or my 13-year-old daughter is smoking. I don't know what to do, and you'd be more of a listener and advice giver instead of a sexual being. In my early 20s I did some escorting, gigolo work. I was afraid of what type of women would be willing to pay for sex, and my first client was exactly what I expected. Luckily, she didn't want me to do anything to her and just wanted to give me a blowjob while I fingered her asshole. She was amazing at it, BTW. My second client that day, however, wow, she was a legit 8 out of 10. She was a taller, 20 pounds heavier version of Maria Menounos. You name it, she wanted to do it. She actually ended up being a repeat customer. Numerous times we would get together, and when all was said and done was my best and most frequent client. She was extremely wealthy and just loved the idea of paying a man, other than her husband, to do the things we were doing. I did phone sex for a bit and the first day was awkward. I felt like I was in a corny porno from the 80s. There were also a surprisingly high number of men that asked which area I lived in and were weirdly insisting on knowing. I'm guessing BC it was over the phone, it felt more real to them. After a couple of hours, I got into my role and moaning like a bad actress became easier and more funnier, but the first hours definitely felt awkward. Male porn talent here. The first day filming a scene was scary for me. This was back in 2007. I was nervous, shaking, just having stage fright, I guess you could call it. Sex is one thing, but videotaped with a crew and following a loose script, it added up to the point that I was honestly almost considering bailing out. My female counterpart in the scene was very nice and helped me get over it. I still chat with her today as friends. She's not in the industry anymore. Stripper here. I was a little nervous and little worried girls would steal my stuff because I didn't have a locker yet. They didn't. I remember making a little over $200 and then walking to a restaurant in Chinatown and tipping the waitress $25 because I was so happy I finally had money of my own and wanted to pay forward the feeling, I guess. Now 3 years in and $200 is on the low end of expected earnings for me, aha. I genuinely love my job, and I can't wait to go back once the Rona runs its course. Thank you for watching Reddit Space. Please subscribe if you love these Reddit stories.